So just a warning. This is, I'm a pretty jokey, jovial guy. This is a little bit more of a serious topic. Don't want to make light of it too much. Obviously, I guess I'm not sure if it would be a trigger warning or content warning, but we are going to be talking about, gun violence essentially and the death of Halyna Hutchins from the Rust film. So just keep that in mind before we move forward. So we have the trial. We have here the involuntary manslaughter trial of the Rust armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. So, if you've been living under a rock and you don't know what I'm talking about at all. So, I think this was 2021, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe late 2021. I forget when this was, but it was a few years back now. Alec Baldwin was starring in and also co-producing this very low-budget film called Rust, this kind of Western film. And stars will be in movies like this because they're really cheap, but they get a big payout. So you've seen that with someone like Bruce Willis, who's before he developed aphasia and mental incapacities, right? He would just be in all of these shitty direct to streaming or direct to VOD action films, and it's why was he in this? It's probably because he got paid way more than he should have for the amount of time he probably put into it, right? So they were making this film, and they were rehearsing a scene where I guess Alec Baldwin would point a gun at the camera, and they were practicing, and Halyna Hutchins, who was the cinematographer, was holding the camera with the director, I think Joel Souza, behind her. But then suddenly the gun went off, and apparently there was a live round in the gun, which there should not have been, mortally wounding Halyna Hutchins, and wounding the director Joel Souza, but he lived. But unfortunately, Halyna Hutchins passed away due to the gunshot, right? Now, there are a few, obviously there's going to be some criminal action, or rather, some legal action taken against, because of the situation. So, you have the armorer, right? So, an armorer on a set is the person who, is in charge of any weapons, right? On this film, it was Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, and she is facing 3 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter and tampering with evidence. There was an initial accusation of potential drug use and hard drinking. I'm not sure if that was ever quite proven. But the big question mark is it's still not clear how live rounds even got onto the set, right? Because, if you're using a real gun on set, you would be using dummy rounds, right? Just blanks. There should never be any occasion for there to be actual bullets in a gun on a film set. And the trial for Hannah Gutierrez-Reed has continued this week, and we have some testimony here from some crew members kind of giving us a clearer picture of what happened that day. Again, this trial is not for Alec Baldwin. That's been in the news, and that trial is going to be happening in July. Potentially, I think they've done forensic analysis, and Alec Baldwin claims he never pulled the trigger and the gun just went off, but then they did forensic analysis, and the people who did that analysis were the only way this gun could have discharged is if you squeezed the trigger. So there's all these questions of is he legally or criminally liable or all that stuff. That trial's happening in July. This is just about Gutierrez-Reed as the armorer. So we have a testimony here from the dolly grip on the film, Ross, I'm going to mispronounce it, Adiego? Ross Adiego, who was in the room where she was shot when they were filming, or they were practicing for this scene. And I have some quotes here. Again, this can be a little unsettling here. Ross says, quote, "We seem to always be rushed and under the gun," end quote. And he describes the production as, quote, "budgetarily restricted and in a constant state of chaos." Another quote here, "moving at ludicrous speeds, racing the production clock. Safety seemed to be secondary." Now, I went to NYU for film, humble flex. And, we had a whole course we had to take called production safety. And they told us all, and they were these maybe 5 or 6 case examples of these instances on films, both student films and professional films, where a horrible accident happened and what could have been done to prevent it. And one of them we talked about was Brandon Lee, the son of Bruce Lee, when he was shot on the set of The Crow. Again, a similar situation. There should have been blanks, but it was a live round. And unfortunately, he died from being shot. which should never happen in the workplace, right? Because this is a workplace. We forget this, but these are these people's jobs. So you should never be in the situation where that's even a possibility. But everything I'm reading here just sounds exactly like all those things where it's, they're running under the gun. They're, like the time is of the essence. Safety. This quote really jumps out again. Safety seems to be secondary. Very, very, very typical again for lower budget things where it's just about go, 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 go. So it's just really unfortunate and really harrowing to hear this testimony. Ross Adiego continues. He describes the shooting, quote, "I think the first person I made eye contact with was Halyna, who was clearly injured by whatever that gunshot was, that noise we had just heard. And in fact, she was starting to go flush, holding her right side," end quote. And Ross claimed that Gutierrez-Reed, quote, "wasn't necessarily as serious or professional as I'm accustomed to with other armorers that I've worked with," end quote. He found her inexperienced, saying, quote, "It seemed inappropriate, out of the ordinary, that those firearms weren't secured. I don't know that they're completely under the armorer's control if they're not under lock and key," end quote. And he also noted that firearms often were left out on carts as, she juggled her double duty as armorer and assistant prop master on the low budget film, right? So again, this idea that, the armorer should be the only thing they're focusing on. They should not also be the assistant prop master, right? And again, this just goes to show how kind of stretched and strained everyone on this production was, that, that's going to lead to issues, potentially fatal issues, right? We also have testimony here from the first assistant director, David Halls. He allegedly handed Baldwin the gun, but he claims that Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer, handed Baldwin the gun, so it's not quite clear. But at the very least, the AD is in a lot of ways like the chief safety person on a film set. And among other roles that the AD serves. So, Halls does admit negligence in not checking the gun, even though the armorer should not, the mistake starts with the armorer, but there should have been that fail-safe that he would then check the barrel and make sure that it was not loaded with live rounds, right? And again, another person, it wasn't just Halyna Hutchins who was injured. You also have the man who was behind her, physically behind her, the director, Joel Souza. He cannot confirm one way or the other who handed Baldwin the gun. And he said that there was, quote, "an enormous amount going on," end quote. Again, reinforcing this idea that, it's when there's too much going on and everyone's too stretched or overextended, mistakes are going to happen. And when you're working with a weapon, sometimes those mistakes can be deadly. And he says here, quote, "She looked distraught." And I remember she talking about Gutierrez-Reed, right? So once he and Hutchins are shot, he's laying there and he says, quote, "She looked distraught. And I remember her saying, 'I'm sorry, Joel.' And I remember somebody just screaming at her and they just ushered her out," end quote. Again, so this was just so preventable. It really is tragic in every sense of the word. Gutierrez-Reed also took the stand, the armorer, and she claimed she shook the rounds, shook the gun to make sure they were dummies. I guess like it would make a certain sound if it was a live round versus a blank. But then we have a conflicting testimony from prop suppliers, Sarah Zachary, as well as the AD, what was his name? David Halls, claiming that she never did that. She never did that check that she's claiming she did. We also have testimony here. I don't think he was involved with the film, but I guess like as a expert witness, right? I think that would be the legal term. A seasoned film armorer named Brian W. Carpenter, who said, quote, "Complacency kills," end quote. And I think that just sums it up right there. Those two words, complacency kills. In Gutierrez-Reed's defense, Carpenter here says, an armorer should have the power to halt production at any moment to instruct actors and crew on firearm safety. Apparently, Gutierrez-Reed was not allowed to do so, that she did not have that control on the set. And Carpenter here said, quote, "Time isn't exact equal to money. It's down to seconds on a film," end quote. Again, this idea that we just have to go, safety be damned, because time is money. And it's just, when you take shortcuts like this, people get hurt. I know I'm kind of going in circles here, but it's just awful. Her lawyers are calling her a scapegoat, and that's true to an extent. You know, it's clear she was not experienced enough, and mistakes were made, really awful mistakes. But I don't think she deserves all of the blame because again, she didn't have that power to halt production and again instruct those actors on firearm safety. And who hired her? Who put those rules in place where she did not have that power? And furthermore, who hired her? The producers, right? You know, the producers are the ones who would make those decisions, and even if they didn't make it directly, they hired the person who then hired her, right? So, you know, if there was a culture of kind of taking shortcuts and kind of like, we'll take this more inexperienced armorer. I believe this was like her first ever experience. I think I read like her father was like an industry, like a very seasoned film armorer, but she had never specifically done it. Like the decision to hire her was the first mistake. And it's clear they hired her probably because of her inexperience. She was probably much cheaper. You know, and there's the discussions again, is Alec Baldwin criminally liable? And I would argue as an actor, no, but as a producer, yes. He is a credited producer on this film. Again, a trial, which was going to be happening in July, you would really need a legal trial to really parse out like, what how much involvement did he really have as a producer, because sometimes people are just producers and they're not really doing anything. But if he has any liability for this tragedy, it would be as a producer, not as the actor. You know, you're handed a gun as an actor, and you're told it has blanks in it. You know, whether he pulled the trigger or not is another question, but you don't expect it to have a bullet inside. But if you're the producer who created the conditions for a tragedy to happen, then I think you're liable. And again, it's just really unfortunate. We have some comments here in the live chat. Vivian Metzger says, "Are those her personal guns or rented? Maybe it came from a safe, quote unquote, safe source and just never got checked. Why was the safety guard off at all?" I completely agree. I'm not sure. I would imagine these are rented. Well, maybe they were probably not her personal guns again, because it also raises questions about like insurance and all that. And in terms of the safety guard, I'm not a firearms expert. I'm not really into guns, so I don't know what would be like the safety. Like I'm not really sure how that would work. But in any case, clearly just something was missed here, and they just someone effed up. I think multiple people effed up here, and it's again someone lost their life, and it's truly awful.